Last week, we left the disciples awestruck in the presence of the risen Christ. Their doubt put to rest, for the moment anyway. Their assignment given, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. The Spirit upon them, working through them in their own wounded and imperfect bodies. When we saw them last, the disciples were rejoicing, confessing their faith, stepping into their calling. And then comes today's reading, which I like to think of as the now what section of the gospel. The disciples have been through the lowest of lows: loss, grief, trauma, betrayal, fear. They've been through the highest of highs: reconciliation, commissioning, restoration, forgiveness. Some time passes. They have a moment to catch their breath, to begin processing these last days and weeks and months and years with Jesus, and they kind of fizzle out. We expect them to go forth, off into the wild blue yonder, forgiving sins and proclaiming peace like Jesus had told them to. Instead, they go home, to the place where this whole thing started, back to Galilee, to what is familiar. I mean, can you blame them? It's a very human response to trauma. There's the loss stage, the new hope stage, then the curl up under the blanket stage, right? Let's say, for example, you survived a terrible winter storm, and maybe you came out of that experience with a renewed passion and purpose. Some time passed, and maybe you're feeling now a little bit less like your voice or your actions matter. You've hit the what's next phase. You settle back in and you hope that things will just go back to the way that they were before. Or let's say that your church family trudged through loss and hurt and uncertainty for years. Maybe you did this during a pandemic, but you stuck it out. You came together to turn a new chapter. You're hopeful and excited. There's no telling what God will do, right? And then some time passes. You settle back into old resentments, old lines drawn in the sand. You're in the what now phase. The conversations turn to, how can we get the church back to what it used to be before all of this, right? Too close to home? Some of you are squirming in your armchairs, giving me some side eye, as you should, perhaps. It's okay. We can identify with, we can affirm the disciples in their need to get back to something familiar, something comfortable. And we can also recognize that this isn't where we want their story to end. This isn't where we want our story to end. So how do we get from the low lows of trauma and the high highs of new hope through the very legitimate need for rest and comfort, and then forward to the joy and life that we are called to? Now what? That's our question, right? I love the text from John 21 today because it gives us a peek into the now what space for the disciples, how they move forward. And it's the perfect text for Bright Sunday because, y'all, this stuff is hilarious. We've got career fishermen who can't catch a thing, a stranger on the beach yelling out instructions telling the professionals how to do their job. I can imagine the eye rolls as they toss their net to the other side of the boat, and then the shock of their sudden success. 153 fish. They almost can't pull them all in. It reminds me of that old I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ethel are working at the chocolate factory. They're wrapping the bonbons and they can't quite keep up, so they start stuffing the chocolates down their shirts and in their pockets and in their mouths. Did the disciples stuff fish in their pockets, down their robes, as they hauled this huge catch in? It's miraculous and absurd. We find out next that Peter has been fishing in the buff. I have no scholarly explanation for this. And then, when he realizes that the stranger on the beach was actually Jesus, he scrambles to get dressed and then jumps straight into the lake. Did he think he'd be able to walk on water again? I imagine him sputtering in the wake of this grand gesture and in the wake of the boat that glides past him toward the shore with his friends. And now we've got disciples, those Jesus called to be fishers of people, bringing not people, but actual fish to Jesus. It's almost slapstick. Peter finally catching up, soaking wet, lake plants hanging off of him, slipping in the sand and mud as he dragged the whole miraculous catch, all 153 fish, up to Jesus' feet. I'm not sure this is what Jesus had in mind when he asked for some of the fish for breakfast. As the story goes, they knew it was definitely him, so they didn't dare to ask who he was. But they get their moment of confirmation. And it happens in the same way that it happens in lots of other post-resurrection stories. The Eucharistic moment of breaking bread, right? But this time it's not bread and wine, it's bread and fish. And you thought that your coffee and toast communion was strange. I love this scene so much. It's just so silly. And I think it really offers us some guidance on our own what now space. How do we move from trauma to hope and on through to new life? Well, here's the plan. First, we're not going to take ourselves too seriously. Instead of looking for each other's mistakes, instead of living in the shame of our own mistakes, we are going to see the humor in our well-intentioned missteps. This will take some practice. But if we can laugh at Peter and say, bless his heart, and watch as he moves from threefold denier of Jesus to relapsed and failing fisherman, to reconciled disciple and leader of the church, we can surely look with that same kindness and empathy on each other. We're going to laugh at the disciples. We're going to laugh at ourselves. We're going to eat together and play together and be silly together. This afternoon is a great opportunity to do that in person, so I really hope that you'll come if you can. There is so much pain and suffering in our world, and we are not going to ignore that. But when we choose to embrace joy and laughter and brightness in the midst of police killings and mass shootings and personal grief, what we are doing is staring death in the face and laughing defiantly. The Easter laugh, a bold prophetic proclamation that death will not have the final say. So, as a part of our What Now plan, we are going to have fun together, okay? Next, like the disciples, we are going to be willing to try something different. We're going to be willing to listen to new voices. When we, like the disciples, are tempted to go back to the way things were before or the way we've always done things, when we really just want to fall back on our own skills and our own knowledge and our own abilities, we are going to remember those empty nets. We are going to listen for God's voice on the margins of our community, at the edge of a lake, y'all. From people we think are strangers or newbies, because we know that that's where God's voice comes from. We're going to be willing to throw our net on the other side of the boat, to do something different, something that might seem silly, something that might seem wasteful, because what have we got to lose, y'all? Our unique history as a church, each of your unique gifts are vital parts of this church family. Your voices and experiences and skills matter. We need you to bring all of that here to this what now time. And we need to hold those things lightly, to be open to God's unpredictability, to new gifts and new experiences and new skills that are being cultivated within and among you even now. Part of our what now plan is to be willing to do things differently. Finally, the most important part of our movement from trauma to new life is taking care of each other. Right after the story that we read, after the disciples have this communion breakfast with Jesus, he pulls Peter aside to have a private conversation. We didn't read this part, but you might remember it. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" He doesn't skip over Peter's trauma. He doesn't skip past Peter's betrayal. He goes right back to the heart of their conflict. 3 denials, 3 opportunities for reconciliation and repair. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," Peter replies 3 times. The sight of our wounds is the sight of our healing. "Then feed my sheep," Jesus says. "Take care of my people who are afraid, uncertain, imperfect. You know, those guys with the fish sticking out of their pockets, the people who spent the last few weeks in hiding, who don't know the way forward, and who I still call and commission as disciples." There are so many ways that you all here at UBC demonstrate care by actually feeding people at God's family dinner, by creating spaces of joy and levity in difficult times like the youth group is so good at doing, by praying for those on the prayer chain, by helping people pay their bills with the benevolence fund. You are a caring people. It's in your DNA as a church. And if we are going to continue this work, if we're going to live forward to whatever God is calling us to, we have to focus also on caring for each other. We need to take care of each other in the same way that Jesus takes care of Peter, by meeting each other with empathy, by looking at our own mistakes, by looking at our church's failures, by acknowledging those as real wounds, acknowledging the parts of our story that feel like betrayals, and by meeting all of that with empathy, kindness, opportunities to repair. I think this is our biggest task in this what now phase, to meet each other's mistakes with empathy. Beloved, some of you are anxious about the future. Some of you feel shame about the past. Some of you are looking for ways to get back to normal. You're not alone. Jesus' disciples were right there with you in this what now space. And do you know what? Jesus was still with them, even when they didn't know it, even when they didn't recognize him standing there. So here's the plan for now. We're going to have some defiant fun and laughter. We are going to be willing to try new things, and we are going to meet each other with empathy. All of those things build off one another. Joy creates community and openness to difference. Having fun together creates trust and vulnerability that is needed to gently approach our wounds and hurt feelings. Sharing our stories, listening with empathy to each other, that's the work that turns shame and anxiety into shared meaning and purpose. So that's our task, the same task that the disciples had. That's our task right now. That's our focus. Are you willing to give it a try? Let's pray together. God, give us love, give us joy, give us peace and hope together. Help us to not sweep things under the rug or move on by or move on back to the way things were before. Give us the courage and the vulnerability to care for each other, to show up for each other, to forgive each other, and to move forward into your bright, bright future for us. Amen.